on today's StoryBeat.
But in the process of writing the script, we started to get word, oh, there's a play with Bryan Cranston on Broadway. There's one that everybody loves. Now Spielberg is going to option it. Now it's going to be a movie. And so every step of the way, I'm looking at this script, LBJ, as if my whole career rests on the outcome of this, whether or not it becomes a movie. And Bryan Cranston is lurking in the shadows, making what becomes a Tony-winning play. And we're just thinking, he's killing us. Bryan Cranston is out there absolutely killing us. This is my dream. And it's going to be ruined by Walter White.
This is StoryBeat with Steve Cuden, a podcast for the creative mind. StoryBeat explores how masters of creativity develop and produce brilliant works that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Steel City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My guest today, the phenomenal screenwriter and novelist Joey Hartstone, had his first two feature films directed by no less than Rob Reiner. The first film, LBJ, which was named to Hollywood's highly respected Blacklist in 2014, starred Woody Harrelson as LBJ. Joey's second feature, Shock and Awe, featured Woody Harrelson, James Marsden, Tommy Lee Jones, Jessica Biel, and Milla Jovovich. He was a member of the writing staff for the first two seasons of The Good Fight, and he is currently the showrunner and an executive producer of Showtime's Your Honor, starring a favorite StoryBeat guest, Bryan Cranston. Joey's debut novel, The Local, a legal thriller about an East Texas patent attorney's first murder case, was published in the spring of 2022 by Doubleday and is being developed as a series with CBS Studios and King Size Productions. I've read The Local and can tell you it's a brilliant, fast-paced, thoroughly entertaining legal murder mystery, very much in the vein of John Grisham and Scott Turow. I highly recommend The Local to you and am very glad that it's being developed for TV. Who knew intellectual property law could be so exciting? Joey and his wife Abby are adapting the book In the Blood, How Two Outsiders Solved a Centuries-Old Medical Mystery and Took on the U.S. Army as a feature film with Star Thrower Entertainment. For the record, Joey and I have known one another for many years, having graduated together from UCLA's famed MFA in Screenwriting program. So for all those reasons and many more, it's a truly great pleasure for me to welcome my friend, the multi-talented writer and producer Joey Hartstone, to StoryBeat today. Joey, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Steve. It's great to be here.
It's a real great pleasure to have you here. So let's go back in time a little bit. Where did you start to get the bug for writing mysteries and law stuff? Where did that all begin?
The very end of my college career, I had gone to school thinking that I was going to go to law school and become a lawyer and get into politics maybe. And I worked for my father on his congressional campaign, his failed congressional campaign, and hated the experience. And so by the time my senior year came, I just knew I didn't want to go to law school and do that. And we had a visiting professor at Brandeis, where I went to school, who was coming from UCLA, and he was a screenwriter. And so I took our first screenwriting class that they ever offered at that school and just fell in love with it and moved out to LA the next year.
So you didn't, as a little kid, you were not like totally fascinated by movies and TV, that you wanted to be in the arts?
I loved movies from the moment, but I think like I was a little baby and I would just stare at the screen if it was on. I would watch anything my entire childhood. So I loved it. I was from Flagstaff, Arizona. I didn't know anybody who ever actually made their living in Hollywood. So it just honestly didn't occur to me that there were jobs to be had in this industry. And so it wasn't until I got to college and really started thinking about it and started taking some film courses, and then finally took this writing course and I fell in love with it.
And so as an undergrad, you were a poli-sci major, yeah?
Yeah. Yep.
So you had some interest in politics prior to all of this.
That's what I thought I really wanted to do. But I often say this, but I think I wanted to do politics or law, but then it turned out that what I really wanted to do was try to write like John Grisham or A Few Good Men or things like that. That's why I loved the law, was because I love movies and stories and books about the law. So
were you writing in high school, and were you writing as a kid?
Not really. I guess I think it is how I would express myself, even if I didn't do this professionally. I certainly would feel overwhelmed with emotion, and that is what I would do. I didn't play the guitar or do other forms of art. I did like to write, but it didn't occur to me to really pursue this until late in college.
But once you started into it, it really took, yeah.
Yeah, there was like a perfect kind of coming together of a few things. One was we had Ethernet at college, and we had this fast speed kind of intraweb, and someone had loaded the first 4 seasons of The West Wing up. And so when I was at college, it was hard to watch television. I wasn't watching NBC Wednesday nights or whenever The West Wing aired. So I got to catch up on the first 4 seasons. And I was watching those every single night. And just that for me, like hearing Sorkin's words, it was like I can see and hear what dialogue is supposed to be or what I would love it to be. And then I started minoring in film, and then I took the screenwriting course. So a few things happened all at once. And I realized this is what my love in life is to try to be a screenwriter.
Well, if you are going to attach yourself to thinking like Aaron Sorkin, you're already in the right place.
Yeah, I honestly think the longer I go, the less I try to write like him.
Sure.
But I think you have to have those, you have to have those inspirations and those people that you want to try to sound like. And if you pick someone great and you fall a little short, you're still probably in good shape. So,
Well, yeah, but we all have to start emulating somebody somewhere.
Yeah.
Very few people, as young people, are formed as writers. It takes a while.
right. Yes.
And do you feel now that your voice has come out? Do you feel like your voice is your voice?
Yeah, I think in some ways I think less about it. I mean, people like Sorkin and Mamet are people, they're very, very in your face.
Yes.
So I've had to dial that back, because if you can't do what they do as well as they do it, it's obviously bad, because the way they write is very obvious. And so I think whether it was the movies I was working on and collaborators weren't trying to kind of platform that dialogue that way or whatever it was, I had to sort of try different techniques, and then ultimately realize that I'm not setting out to try to write to sound like those guys.
No, you're trying to sound like what you need it to sound like. And frankly, you're selling yourself just a half step short, because your honor, you're very much in our face. It's really good.
Well, there's a line in Walk the Line where June Carter says to Johnny Cash, how'd you find your sound? Steady like a freight train, slow like a razor, or sharp like a razor. And he says, we'd play faster if we could. And that's kind of how I feel, not to compare my writing to Johnny Cash, but that's how I feel. At this point, I'm trying to improve, but I kind of write just after, 15 or 20 years of doing it, you sort of write the way that you write, and you hope that other people like it.
So what I guess I'm saying to you, I was waiting for you to be less modest, but you very much have your voice. It's clearly you, and it has a certain ring to it, and it's very tense and terse and tight. So all those things are very, very good. Do you think of yourself at this point as a writer, or do you think of yourself more as a screenwriter or a novelist? Do you have a thought in your head as to what you think of your out front persona is?
Yeah, I think of myself as a screenwriter. I'm very happy that I got a book published. Hopefully I will get to do that some other time in the future, but I almost feel, I still kind of feel like a fraud. Like if I'm doing an author talk or something like that, or if someone says the word author, I'm like, oh, I'm a screenwriter. I got lucky enough to make a book, but I don't read enough to warrant being called an author. I've watched enough film and television in my life to at least have put that to use in my real career.
So you have a little case of imposter syndrome over being a novelist then.
Oh yeah. I mean, well, people would often ask like, so, what were your inspirations for this book? And a lot of mine are, like The Firm and The Pelican Brief and Presumed Innocent. And you'll start to notice a pattern with most of these books that they also have film adaptations to them. And so while I have certainly read a lot of those books and then went on to read, other Turow and Grisham and Connolly books, usually I found them, via Tom Cruise or some other actor.
Well, there's no question that the local reads like a movie. I wouldn't call it an academic exercise. It's a thriller, and it reads like a movie, like you've written a very detailed outline for a movie, though it's way deeper than an outline. So tell the listeners who don't know what it's about. I mentioned a little bit of it in the intro, but explain what The Local is about.
I think you had a better log line than I've ever used, which was, I think you said, a patent lawyer tries his first murder case, which was the most succinct. I've never done it that quickly. But yeah, it's about a patent lawyer in East Texas in a real town called Marshall, which is sort of one of the epicenters of intellectual property law in this country. And so he's sort of a hotshot lawyer with a very niche ability and field. And his corporate client gets accused of killing someone close to him. And so he has to become a criminal defense attorney for this one case.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, so that's kind of the basic premise of the local.
So how did you figure out how to write patent law or intellectual property law into a thriller?
Yeah. So I have a friend named Nathan who's an intellectual property lawyer, and he's the one that told me about this town. And so when he told me there's this little town and every major corporation in the world gets sued here, and they hate that they get sued here, but they do, and that all these big white shoe law firms have to try all these cases here, but they all have to add a local patent attorney from Texas because those people speak the language and they can communicate with the jurors. I thought, well, here's a great setting and a great character. And then it was one of those, you kick around ideas sort of in the background a lot. And so this one I kicked around a lot, but I always loved it. And I kept trying to think like, okay, what's the patent law case that I can hang a season of television on or a movie? And finally, I just threw in the towel, even though I find patent law and intellectual property law very interesting. And I said, what if I kill somebody? And then I thought, all right, who should I kill? And how does he end up defending the person accused? And then it was off to the races a lot quicker, which is why, the firm is about a tax attorney,
Sure.
But then it's got the mob and his life is in danger. So the one thing that I wanted to do different from that was I really like, and this is why I like Michael Connelly's books a lot, like the Lincoln Lawyer books. I really wanted to see the lawyer in the courtroom. And now a tax lawyer is not going to try a case, so that made sense for the firm. But even if there's things happening outside of the courthouse, I wanted to see this person's skills on display.
So I want to be a little bit clearer for the listeners who don't know what intellectual property law is. I'm not in it, but I've dealt with intellectual property and contracts and all that for my entire career. So I have a pretty good layman's understanding of intellectual property law. Tell us what you think intellectual property law is and why people should pay attention to it.
Sure. So broadly, it's copyrights, it's patents, it's things like that. So in East Texas, in this particular courthouse, we're talking about patent infringement. So we're talking about companies that are accused of infringing on other companies' patents. And so, if you're an inventor, you own the patent on something, and then you think that Apple or Amazon or any of these companies are using a piece of your idea, your intellectual property, you can sue them. And 20 years ago, it became very popular to sue in East Texas.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that your poli-sci background helped you because it gave you at least an insight into how politics functions in a small town like that? To a certain extent, there's small town politics going on in your book.
Yeah, I think I'd like that I can draw upon hopefully something I learned as a poli-sci major and as I was hoping to go to law school. And then also being from Flagstaff, I was from a town that was about the size of Marshall, Texas. So anytime I found myself not knowing about this setting and what might happen in this location, I just sort of cheated and I wrote about what my hometown was like and hoped that the authenticity of that rung true.
Well, no one would really know unless they were truly into the specific details of Marshall and how many people are there that are that. So,
right.
And I wouldn't have known the difference, though someone from Marshall might have known the difference. Yeah. How did you know, even though you wanted to be a lawyer, how did you know so much about law? Did you have to do a lot of research?
I did. My father was a lawyer. I have a lot of lawyers in the family and a lot of lawyer friends, including the one who gave me the idea for this. So, I just pester every lawyer in my family with questions as I develop stories that are based in the law. And in particular, my Aunt Kathy, who is a criminal defense attorney for about 40 years in California. Anytime I have an idea, I get her on the phone and bother her for hours on end asking her questions. And then I did it with this, and she read several drafts of the book, and she would give me feedback and help me kind of crack the case. She even visited the writer's room of Your Honor a couple of times. She's so, and if you're unlucky enough to be a family or friend and you're a lawyer in my life, then probably annoyed you at some point.
They're unlucky, but you're very lucky.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, the fact that you could turn to people that you know and are familiar with and ask them their opinion about things, that's really a big deal.
Yeah, it was super helpful because I did go to Marshall. I met with a few attorneys there, and that was certainly invaluable. But in a couple hours of a conversation, you're going to get some amazing things you couldn't get elsewhere. But they're not going to be as open and easy to interact with and pitch ideas to.
So you didn't spend a lot of time in law libraries or digging through the internet for stuff. It was really people you were talking to.
Yeah. Like I said, I went to Marshall for a handful of days. I got to see a trial there or watch a few days of a trial. And then I wanted to go back one more time before I really started in the outlining process. But COVID hit and I didn't have anything else to write. I wanted to write this. And I thought, okay, well, I know I have the time, even if I haven't done as much of the research as I want. So I'm gonna have to, read up on the internet and then just try to cheat and Google Earth things that I would have otherwise liked to have driven by and then stepped out and seen. But I think hopefully I did enough.
All right. So when you started, the process of doing a novel is clearly similar in some ways to writing a screenplay or a screen story, especially the type of work that you specialize in, yet it's different. What would you say are the serious differences between developing a novel and developing a screenplay?
The length, that was probably the biggest. When I conceived of this idea, I originally thought of it as a feature. Then I wanted to pitch it as a TV series, and then COVID hit. And the thing with a TV series, you can conceive of it an entire season, but usually what happens is at best you get to write one episode. So you write the beginning, and then you have all these great ideas that you want to infuse into the next 9 episodes, and then usually you don't get picked up and you never get to write that stuff. And so when I was thinking of this idea for the local, one thing that struck me was I really wanted to write the whole thing. And I got sad at the notion that even in a good scenario, I was likely to sell the idea and not get to finish it. So because I had the time, I thought, well, I'll try it as a novel. And if it just serves as a basis for helping me pitch a series, that's fine. But at least I'll have the fulfillment that a writer gets from finishing something. And I can write, if you're doing a legal mystery and you're doing it the correct way, you're going to plot out most of the mystery and you're going to know all the twists and turns and things like that. And so to only write the pilot, but know all of that stuff just felt really discouraging to me. So I wanted to write the whole thing. So it felt more like plotting out about 6 episodes of television or 2 movies. So it was a bit longer than anything I had written before, but very similar, like you say, in the outlining process.
So as you're working to perhaps bring it to television, do you foresee that the book itself becomes an entire season, or is it short of a season?
The book would be a season. So I did, talking about inspirations, Michael Connelly was kind of the inspiration. The Lincoln Lawyer was kind of the inspiration for that. That was the book that I saw that I wanted to emulate. And in a lot of the Michael Connelly shows that are 10 episodes, they take 2 books. For the Lincoln Lawyers, they're taking just 1. But for like all the Bosch seasons, they take 2 Bosch books and make it 10 episodes. So I only have 1 book, and it's about the same length as all of those books. So it's not enough for a full season of television, but I'm using it hopefully as the skeleton, and I think that'll be good. Hopefully there'll be a writer's room, and we'll get to expand stories, look into other aspects of other characters. This is told in the first person, so it's very focused on the main character.
Sure, it is.
Yeah, so it's I think the beginning and ends are sort of where they are, but everything else will be expanded and moved around to tell hopefully a 10 episode.
So aside from the length of this, the big difference being that it is a lot longer than writing a screenplay, and a screenplay has to be terse and very tight anyway, and a book you can be a little more expansive and go develop certain things and character things and so on. But would you say that your method for developing the structure of the book is similar to structuring a screenplay? Are you looking at 7 plot points and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I did it exactly the same way. I actually do. You and I were talking before about Fred Rubin, who was a teacher at UCLA. He taught television writing because he was a television writer, and I was not particularly interested in TV writing, but I took 2 of his classes, and he taught very intense outlining as they do in TV. And that's really the class where I learned how to outline for not only for television, but I applied what he taught me to film. So I do much longer outlines for my feature scripts than I think most people do, because I like the idea they do in TV where they throw in dialogue and they throw in other ideas that they have for scenes. It's not meant to be as concise as maybe a feature outline would be. So I did the exact same thing that I do for a feature or a TV show.
I'm willing to bet James Cameron has you beat on that, though.
Probably. I'm not trying to set a record. But my hope is that I try to do most of what I feel like is really the difficult work and the grunt work in the outline. And then when I go from outline to script, my hope is that I don't have to look at anything other than my outline.
Mm-hmm.
And then that affords me the freedom to be creative in the moment because I have a very, very clear roadmap of what I'm trying to do, or at least what I thought I was going to try to do.
All right. So how long did it take you to develop the outline for the book?
When I really started going with it, it was probably 2 to 3 months.
2 to 3 months.
Yeah.
And is this pretty much every day or 5 days a week, that kind of thing?
Yeah, it was every day. I don't like to take days off, and we didn't have children back then, so it was easy to not take days off. So yes, because I feel like it's like exercise where if I take days off, I'm a little sluggish back into it. So it was every day for I think 2.5 or 3 months, and my outlining always takes longer than writing my first draft.
Well, sure, because if you've really done a really good job of that outline, that first draft should just happen.
Yeah, it's very fast.
It's almost like you're filling in blanks is
Yes.
almost what it's like.
Right.
So then once you had this outline, how long did it take you to write the book?
I think it was about a month. I mean, and then certainly a ton of rewriting, but to get that first draft, it was about a month, I think.
A month. So that's really fast. It's 280 pages, something like that?
Yeah, it was like I think 93,000 words, I think was the final draft. So it's one of those where it's like I had the idea, I thought about the idea for a couple years. I got serious about it for 5 or 6 months, and then I sat down to write the outline and then the first draft, and that was a 4 or 5 month process all in.
Clearly, you can't spend that kind of time working on a television episode. That's much faster, correct?
Usually, yeah. I'm thinking most of the television I end up writing are pilots. So if you write pilots, you can spend some time. But yeah, once you're into a TV show, you're talking weeks.
Well, when you're doing Your Honor, you can't spend months developing an outline for one episode.
No, definitely not. Your months and your months involve 8 episodes in various phases of incarnation.
Sure. And how much rewriting did you do?
For the local?
For the local, yeah.
I did a handful of months. It was far easier than writing films and television. So the first person I gave it to was my wife, Abby. She gave me a lot of notes, as she always does, and she's a fantastic writer and certainly honest with me. And so I get some difficult notes. So getting past that is always a real hurdle because she's a tough critic in a really good way.
Mm-hmm.
Then I gave it to a woman named Rachel Dillon Freed, who became my agent. She's our friend, but she also became my book agent. She sent it out, and once I had an editor, the editor said to me, I'm going to give you a bunch of notes. They're just notes. I understand that this is your baby. You can take or leave any notes that you don't like. They're just suggestions. And anyone who's ever worked in film and television will understand that that is not the mandate from on high when you're talking to executives or directors or stars. So it was so easy in comparison.
Well, of course it is, because there is a real difference, I think, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong. There's a real difference in the fact that you're working in this cauldron of humans on a show versus you're writing a novel that's your novel.
Yeah.
And someone else is looking at it and giving you their feedback and opinion, but unless they're really very much involved in some way, they're not going to have ownership of it the way that you do.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that was really fun because I try to embrace the collaborative process. I love that. I think, I pity the person who hates collaboration and then wants to be a screenwriter.
Oh, no kidding.
So it was fun to sort of take a break from that and just tell a simpler version of the story that I wanted to tell.
And you had the joy to have the freedom to tell what you wanted to tell with no one else giving you their thoughts every step of the way.
Yeah. So there was a joy to that. It was very interesting to do.
All right. So what are a few of the things that a novelist must do? What did you need to do that helped you to secure a chance at publication versus a television show, which is a totally different animal when you're trying to get it to that next place? What are the things that a novelist ought to consider to do?
I'm not going to have great advice here. I was very fortunate. So one was I was already a professional writer. So I think it's much easier to jump into, if you're a professional novelist, it's probably a lot easier to become a screenwriter than if you're just an aspiring screenwriter. And so as an aspiring novelist, but as a professional screenwriter, I was going to be taken seriously kind of immediately. And like I said, my wife went to school with the woman who had become my book agent. So I knew someone, I already had a contact. I sent her my manuscript very quickly. And she liked it. And then I think, I wasn't hiding the fact that I wanted this to be a TV series and it's a business. And so I think people who were reading it, publishers, editors who were reading it, if a book gets turned into a movie or a television show, that's very helpful for book sales. And so I probably brought a slightly better than average chance at this book becoming a TV series than a non-screenwriter.
In other words, if you had never worked on a television show in your life and had never sold a screenplay to anyone in your life, if you'd written this as your first piece, this novel, it would have probably been a lot more challenging to get a publisher interested, and certainly even more challenging to get a big name like a Doubleday interested.
I assume I wouldn't have had this book published. That yeah.
That's important stuff,
Absolutely.
though. It's helpful that one thing can lead to the next, and when you have certain credentials under your belt or credits, that's helpful to give the people you're approaching confidence that you actually know what you're doing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that it's, for me, I think it's a good lesson of work hard and try to have some success in something, and then worry about expanding to the other things you want to do.
Sure.
Rather than try to do too many things at once, because it's hard enough just to break into one thing. But yeah, it once you've opened a door somewhere, I think it's easier to open doors at other places.
And the first things that you did were things that were your true passion, being a screenwriter.
Yeah.
So describe the process that you went through with the publishing house. I assume that there was a process there, that somebody at the publishing house read it and then gave you some kind of feedback.
So, Rachel sent it out to a bunch of people, and Doubleday wanted to publish it. And so, yeah, I worked back and forth. I think I got 2 or 3 rounds of notes from my editor, and then there's a copy editing back and forth that took a few passes. It was a few years ago now, but as a screenwriter, all I can remember is the relative ease of the entire process, because it's just not what making a film is like, and certainly not what making a television show is like.
They didn't come to you at the publishing house and ask you to restructure things or to throw a character out or to develop some other thing. It was pretty much they were helping you to polish it so that it was perfect.
I got very good notes. They were very specific. Yeah, there weren't big, broad notes, and certainly no structural notes. They were more specific than that, but very, very good and very helpful.
I think that that's something that the listeners should pay attention to, is that if you do a good job in the first place, which I'm certain you did, that's helpful. So in a screenplay, people sometimes, you correct me if I'm wrong again, sometimes in screenplays, people are in a hurry and it's a little sloppier than you would turn into a publishing house with your book.
For sure. And I mean, there are people, you've certainly heard the expression, fill in the adjective, but trashy draft or terrible draft or vomit draft or whatever the case may be. But a lot of people embrace that notion of you have to get that first draft out, however you do it, understand that most of it's going to be unusable. And I hate that notion. It doesn't work for me. First of all, I can't make myself write and work thinking this is going to be garbage. I don't find my way as I'm writing. Usually I like to structure, I like to outline. And so it's, I could write something that no one likes and is very bad. It's not often at this point where I get a big structural note, because I've spent so much time working on the structure before I started writing. So I expect that either the structure is sound or I've made a colossal mistake very early on. But, I like when people say that my first draft is very clean, or that they rarely read a first draft that has as few typos as they find in the first draft and things like that. I take pride in my first draft. And I love a first draft because it is my only personal draft. Once there's other collaborators working on it, and it's good that other people get to work on it, but it becomes ours. And so the first draft, even though it's never as good as the final draft, is my own personal draft. So I treasure it.
Can you tell when you're writing your first draft that is as good as you can get it? Can you tell whether it's going to work? Can you tell at that point?
Not really. I mean, no, I think I don't know. And it's always fun reading it, because the way I like to write, I have a sense if my outline is strong or not. But then when I'm writing, especially something as long as a book like The Local, I might read the last few paragraphs that I wrote the day before, but I don't go over it every single day.
Mm-hmm.
So I write and then I go on to the next. And so the first time I read the true first draft, the really just the first time I read it from front to back, there's a lot that I don't even remember writing. So it's a fun read, a scary read, and sometimes a frustrating read. But it's usually a surprise to me of either how well or how badly it's reading to me.
It's also helpful when you're working on a TV show that eventually actors are going to say it out loud. And now you really know whether it works or not, because they can't get words out of their mouth or it's really smooth.
Yeah, yes. And you have several editing phases along the way. So, yes, you have plenty of collaborators, which is nice because someone, if you make a real big mistake, is going to point that out to you long before you're shooting. But you also get the chance to sort of rewrite in the edit bay and make a lot of changes along the way.
So we've now talked about publishing. We're now going to talk about studio work, which you've done a lot of. What are the things that happen when you're working with a studio or a network that are clearly quite different than the publishing world? And what can writers do to make that process easier?
So I would say one thing that's really important, I think, is embracing the collaborative process and the fact that you're going to get a lot of notes and that your job as a writer is to learn how to take notes and to apply them.
How do you take notes? What's your technique?
Well, I type down everything someone says. I take all the notes myself. Assistants are always there to type up everything, but if you're the showrunner, I don't think you should leave someone else's interpretation of what the head of a network just told you. It's too important. So I write down everything myself, and then you also have to understand who you are. So who am I? I'm the person that's going to get my feelings hurt when my wife gives me notes. I'm the person who's going to get mad when someone tells me they don't like something I read. And that may mean that I have to take a breath for 5 minutes or 5 days before I dig into the notes and actually start applying them. But you have to know your flaws. And I try to embrace the idea that almost all the time, if there's a note because there's a problem. And the person who gives you the note might not have given you the correct solution, and they might not have even highlighted why the problem exists or what the real problem is. And they'll call that the note behind the note. But it's very rare that there's a great line and a great scene and someone's noting it to death, and they're just missing the point. Usually there's something wrong. So I try to embrace the idea that it's always going to need notes. That's always going to improve it, but don't fight the notes.
I'm so glad to hear you say what you're saying, because for years I've taught students who sometimes doubt what I'm saying to them that the key is whether you agree with the notes or not, you take them all.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's also funny because I've taught students too, and I have often got the question, like, what do you do if you get a note that you don't like? It's like, well, if you're a screenwriter, you're taking the note. I mean, you need to try to take it and apply it in a way that both you and the note giver like the result, but you don't have the option not to take it. And I also think it's a bit freeing, I like it because this company is paying for this show. It's not my show. So if they say we're killing off a character, we're killing off a character. That's just sort of the way it is. And so my creativity is, can I execute that note in a way that I'm happy with?
Have you had situations where you were given a note and you had no idea how to resolve it? Has that happened for you?
Usually from my producing partners, not from the studio or network, but yes, it's happened. And I say producing partners like on Your Honor, that's Liz Glotzer, that's Michelle King, and these are people who read every document before anybody else reads it. And they like my wife will give me sort of the unvarnished notes. And so I've turned in an outline or two where they said, this is not an episode of television. and that's hard. That's really, really hard. And because it's TV, not only, when I say I want to take 5 days and hide under the covers, you don't have that in television. So you have to go through that process quickly.
You got to keep moving forward.
Yeah.
Once you're on that train and the train is going down the tracks, it doesn't stop for you, does it?
No, it does not.
So do you have a method for Joey Hartstone to develop characters? It's something you learned at UCLA, or is it something you've developed further since?
It is one of the aspects to my writing that I really want to continue to improve on, because I don't think I'm great at it. And I don't say that with any false modesty, because I've gotten a lot of notes about my character development. And having just written a feature with my wife, that's something she's particularly good at. And we got better feedback than I've ever gotten on an individual script about the character development. So I'm going to try to emulate sort of what that process was when I was writing with Abby, which is honestly having conversations with Abby or someone close to me about real people, because that's what we did. We would talk about a scene or a situation, and we would just have a long conversation about, well, who is this guy? Like, why is he doing what he's doing? Why is she making this decision? And that just, I think, brought depth and realism to it. So I think I need to do that. I'm going to try to be better about that with my characters, and probably having real conversations with people who have either skin in the game or just willing to give me some time and insight.
So your specialty clearly is writing something that is plot heavy, that is mysteries or thrillers or whatever it is. I mean, Your Honor is very densely plotted. It's not a simple plot. It's not just tossed off. It's really complex. And I'm just wondering, do you find that when you go to develop character that you're still trying to make the character drive the story versus the plot drive the story?
I'm not quite sure. I mean, honestly, because I mentioned Sorkin, the aspect of screenwriting that I really fell in love with first was dialogue. So that was what I was excited to do. I didn't think of myself as someone who was huge into plot, and a lot of the stuff that I watch isn't big on plot. So,
Like what? What do you watch that isn't big on plot?
well, so like take West Wing for example. There's certainly an ABC story, but it is almost always two people in a room or three people in a room having very fascinating conversations using really interesting dialogue. And so that was kind of always what I was looking to do was yes, build out a plot, but it's not plotty in the sense that like I didn't think I'd be a thriller writer. That wasn't even a genre that I was. Legal thriller, yes, I suppose, but I really like straight dramas. That was kind of what I fell in love with, the movies that made me want to write movies.
Well, The Local kept driving me forward because I didn't know what the solution was. And when the solution came, I was surprised by it. So
Yeah.
that's a good thing.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad about that. With the character, I finally come to the conclusion. I never thought I had a problem with character development. I always saw my characters as very deep and kind of well-rounded people. And the conclusion I've come to is that I'm a very closed off person in a lot of ways. And I think I make the same mistake with my characters. So it's not that I'm emotionless. I'm feeling a lot of things. I just tend to be fairly stoic. And I think I've made that mistake with my characters. And so people will read them and that there will be times where they're saying like, we don't know what this person is thinking, or they seem very dispassionate. And I'm thinking, are you kidding me? That person is filled with energy or emotion or sadness right now. How does no one know that? So I think my personal flaws have translated to my characters a little bit. And so maybe some good therapy will help me write characters better.
Some of the greatest and most memorable and popular movies of all time feature protagonists who are stoic.
It's true.
I mean, you can just point to Clint Eastwood for one.
Yeah.
He's made a career out of playing stoic characters. So I'm going to ask you a question that I ask lots of guests, and I'll be real curious to hear your answer. What for you then makes a good story good? What are the characteristics of a good story for you?
I actually do think it starts with a good character, because I will watch a character do almost anything. Abby and I were talking about this the other day. And I actually think I took a little bit of this from one of our professors at UCLA, and I can't remember which one, but characters should have passions. And I think a character who's passionate about something is interesting, and I will watch a well thought out character be passionate about something I couldn't care less about. So some of my favorite movies are baseball movies, and that is a sport I refuse to watch. But I will watch Moneyball every night for the rest of my life, or Bull Durham, or because that person cares about what they're doing. So I think if you can create a really compelling character, they can have any job or any story, and you'll probably follow them for quite some time.
It's all about passion, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
It really is. It's completely about passion. So we've talked a lot about dialogue. What is it then that makes dialogue great? Why is Sorkin work, and why do others seem to work less well?
Yeah, I guess it depends on what your approach is. I think with someone like, what I like about Sorkin and what I like about Mamet is there's no attempt to write how people actually speak. They start, I think, with the contention that the way we truly converse with one another is not phenomenally interesting. And so they're going to improve upon it. Now they have their own styles, but so I think for me, it's always been that. It's always been the ability to write conversations or interactions or arguments and make them better than they would have sounded. They sound as good as the stories we tell about ourselves after we've told the same story for 5 years and we've polished up all the dialogue and we've made ourselves sound like we had the winning lines and we had the right jabs at the right times. So I like that process. I like scripts where every line matters and every single thing someone says, there's an intention behind it, and they say it with, they say things that are clever and they say things that they don't mean, and you start to get a sense of why people talk the way that they do.
We've talked a lot about Aaron Sorkin, and I know one of his things is, which I found really fascinating and telling and really helped to inspire me quite a bit, is that when he's writing, especially his passionate sections of things, for instance, the Jack Nicholson speech and for A Few Good Men.
Yeah.
A Few Good Men. I knew it was in there somewhere. But what Sorkin says is that he's writing, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, that he's making an argument with God.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. I wrote a script recently where a couple different, I mean, this happens almost every time I write, but there's something that Sorkin's going to inspire. And there were a few things from A Few Good Men that inspired a couple scenes. And so, yeah, I think, that character, Colonel Jessup, he's not a bad guy. He's the antagonist. He does some bad things. He makes questionable decisions, but ultimately that speech, is not some guy who couldn't have cared less about two young Marines. This guy wanted to protect the country, and that's a noble endeavor. How he went about it might not be noble, but he sort of, I think what Sorkin likes to say is that I'm going to be this person's lawyer. I'm going to make the best argument for them. And I think that's right. I mean, we all know that the best antagonists make for better protagonists. And so I think when you try to pay enough credit to all of your characters and make sure that they are treated properly, it elevates everything around it as well.
I think that's absolutely true. Tell us about In the Blood, how two outsiders solved a centuries-old medical mystery and took on the U.S. Army. What's that about?
So that's about two guys, one named Bart Gulong, who was a salesman, kind of a bit of a Willy Loman character, in his 50s, around the year 2000 or so. And he meets a guy named Frank Hersey, who is an inventor who hasn't invented anything of particular note at this point. So they're both sort of middle-aged, still trying to have the success and fulfill the promise of their youth and that they thought they might have one day. And they start developing some oxygen generators for the military. And it turns out that Frank has a method for clotting blood that he believes will work and that no one has ever tried before. And this is a true story, obviously. And so they end up developing it, and it works. And so they want to bring it to the military right around the time of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, a time when the military would really want something like this. But the Army has its own technique, its own product that they believe very deeply in, which turns out to not be as effective. And so it becomes this sort of David versus Goliath of these two young, not young, middle-aged guys who aren't being taken seriously, but have something that could potentially save a lot of lives, going up against the U.S. Army and all of their money and all of their power, and just trying to get in the door to prove that they have something that the military might want.
And so this has been developed as a feature?
So yeah, this is the one that I wrote with my wife. We finished writing it last year, at the end of last year, and it is now out with the producers and out in the world and hopefully getting some good reads.
You're not in pre-production or anything yet. It's now you're trying to sell it.
No, we're just trying to sell it. Yeah.
It sounds like a fascinating project, I hope you can sell it.
The book is fantastic by Charlie Barber, and the story is really compelling, and I think Abby and I did a good job. And these are producers I've worked with in the past, so they're being very specific about who they go to and trying to find the right collaborators to hopefully make a movie.
So you clearly at this point know how to put something together to pitch it so that it can sell, whether it's on a TV series or whether it's a feature film. What thoughts do you have about ways to pitch things that make it a little more successful, probably?
Yeah, that I think that one is, for most of us, is just a lot of practice. Yeah, as I said, I learned something from you about my own book today, about how I should pitch it. It's not my favorite thing to do. I think a lot of writers share that. It's sort of a weird skill that you need as a professional writer because it has nothing to do with your ability to write.
No, none.
And so some people, you seem like you were probably more comfortable doing it, or maybe.
Oh, no, it's the worst part of my game.
Okay, yeah.
I get all nerved out and I don't know what I'm doing, and I get tongue-tied and the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, it's awful. I used to have a point before every pitch where I would think I was going to quit the business. I would truly think, not only am I going to be unsuccessful in this pitch, but this is so agonizing that I don't ever want to do it again. And once I recognized that, I would still have that moment, but I'd try to laugh at it and go like, okay, just give it an hour and then you're going to come back and you're going to do the work. But so yeah, the more I do it, the more comfortable I feel, but it's not my favorite thing by any means. And I would say, to go back to the idea of passion, that's the best thing you can do, is truly be passionate about what you want to write. Because I remember early on, when you're passionate about just wanting a job, that comes across too.
Yes.
And so it's great. The best thing I ever pitched was the Rocky series. My wife and I were going to see Creed 2, and I found out she'd never seen Rockies 1 through 5 or Rocky Balboa. She saw Creed 1. I thought, you can't see Creed 2 and Ivan Drago's son if you don't understand all the way up through Rocky 4. So I started telling her about it. And halfway through, I thought, if I could pitch my own stories with the passion and excitement with which I pitch Rocky's stories,
Sure.
I'd be great. So I tried to like remember that and just calm down a little bit, be a little bit less well rehearsed, and just talk about a story that I love and hope that that excitement translates to the recipient.
That really is the key. Part of the problem, I think, at least it is for me, and I know it's true for other writers too, is that when you pitch somebody else's work, it's relatively easy. When you're pitching your own work, it becomes very personal and you get tied up in it and you want to be perfect about it. And so it becomes precious versus I'm just pitching this story, right?
Yeah. And you go, oh, I forgot to tell you this one really important thing that you don't care about, but it matters a lot to me. And it's like, you can skip a lot of that.
It's why I can pitch the local in one line and you're going, how do I get there? Right?
Yeah. It's true. It's true. You get too close to it. So,
but you actually worked with Rob Reiner, who actually did A Few Good Men. So you got those insights as well. Did you ever pick his brains about A Few Good Men and Aaron Sorkin?
All the time. He was so nice. He was so nice about it. When we did LBJ, he was very gracious, allowed me to be on set the entire time. I sat right next to him. He's a very lovely man. He'll tell stories and listen to me fan out. I love A Few Good Men. I love the Castle Rock movies. Those are the movies that I grew up on. So I was a genuine fan before I met him. And I think famous people are never sure at first, but the detail with which I could recite lines and ask him questions about movies like A Few Good Men, I think he realized I was sincere, and he would tell me stories and tell me little things about how that movie came together, and I could just quote a line and he would know what I was talking about. And honestly, it was also helpful because, as the director, he helped rewrite the script, and so I had a real understanding of the types of stories he likes to tell. But we would have a shorthand. There was one time there was a scene that took place on Air Force One, and LBJ was going to look at the bomber jacket that JFK used to wear because he was in JFK's private bedroom. And so I had written, he opens the closet door and he looks and he sees Jack's bomber jacket. And Rob did not talk to me about how to shoot this movie because I would know nothing. But for some reason, he said, I'm not quite sure how we're going to shoot that shot over Woody's shoulder as he's looking at a jacket. And I said, well, that's what you did with Tom Cruise when he looked at all the stuff in his closet and realized that Willie Santiago had not packed the night before he was supposed to leave the base in Guantanamo. And he was like, oh, right, I have shot that exact shot in a movie, so that's fine. So it came in handy there.
Well, I have had the great good fortune to interview Cary Elwes twice.
Yes.
Once live on stage and once on this show.
Yeah.
So, he chatted a bunch about Rob Reiner and what a great director he was, especially on Princess Bride, which is now truly a classic of all classics.
Yeah.
What would you say is the most valuable lesson that he taught you as you were working?
Rob likes to say, everyone thinks you're an idiot, because people will constantly come up to the director and they'll say, did you think of this? Did you do that? And he says, everyone cares about their one thing. And it's both the great aspect to collaboration and also, if you're in charge, the thing that you need to manage. And so I felt like he talked to me like he hoped that I would have a career and that maybe I could use some of this. So he was always imparting wisdom. But yeah, the sound guy might run up to you and say, like, I think I heard a bird in the background. And maybe that really matters. But also, the only thing the sound guy cares about while you're shooting that shot is the sound. And so the director's job in that case is to think about all of it. And so he has a calming presence, and he's very skilled, and he's been doing this a very long time. But so watching him work, it taught me that when you are in a more managerial position, just take everything with a grain of salt and try to bring some calmness while everyone else rightly panics about their one thing.
Mm-hmm. Do you think you might want to direct someday?
No, absolutely not. But it's just not something I ever thought of doing. It's not really how I see stories. But as a showrunner and a director of a film are probably the two, in some ways, very, very similar. And so, because you're in charge of a lot of different departments.
Do you think as a writer, as if you were directing things?
I visualize it for sure, but it doesn't go, it's a pretty simple shot that's in my mind. I'm not thinking about how to make this the most interesting thing you would ever watch. I mean, I know there are some people who will mute a movie so they can just watch the photography, and I'm the opposite. You could blindfold me, and as long as I could hear the dialogue, I'll be entertained. So my interest in film and television is not quite visual, so I don't think that I should be behind a camera or calling action, because I don't think I'd enhance the story at all.
So I have to ask you about your experiences with Bryan Cranston, on your honor. Clearly, I've had a chance to interview him twice, once live on stage and once on this show. I'm just curious. I found him to be an absolutely down-to-earth, pleasant, nice, professional, and a truly interesting man to talk to. What was your experience like?
Yeah, I had the same experience, and that all those qualities are really important in the lead of a show, because he is very much the captain, in so many respects, and so he sets the tone. You know, the star of the show is going to set the tone. If the star of the show comes to work late or unprepared or has an attitude or anything like that, it will have ripple effects. But when he shows up and he is the most professional, he's a kind man to everybody. He does his work. He knows all the people who are working around him. It just sets a good tone for everything. He's also an executive producer on the show, so he's involved from, you know, the scripting process all the way through the final edits. But yeah, he cares very deeply about it. He is down to earth. I think he is who he is. I don't think that fame has gotten to his head or anything like
Mm-mm.
that. And so, and he cares. He cares a lot. And that's one of the, you know, if you were going to pick two or three things that you would want in any collaborator, that would have to be one of them. Is you want someone who cares about the project as much as you do, and wants it to succeed, wants it to be good and to mean something. And he has all that.
Well, he's one of those guys who didn't become famous until way into a long journeyman's career as an actor. And so by the time he became famous, he was so grateful that he
Yeah.
understood how to make all of these things work in a very professional way.
Yeah.
And so you get the benefit of that. And I have no doubt that it's a really wonderful thing to work with a guy like that.
Yeah, it is, and it's nice. I guess like that level of fame came late for him, and yet he also has had this whole career behind him, so he brings a lot of experience too. But yeah, I think a combination of all of that just made him a good partner on this.
Tell us about when you're under pressure, and there's lots of pressure in TV, especially as a producer and an executive producer. My goodness, you must have lots of pressure coming your way. What do you do to handle pressure? How do you blow it off? How do you manage it? What do you do?
The best thing is to have a few close people around you who you can rely on for everything. So, you know, you start with your family, because your family is going to get kind of a weird brunt of all the negativity and pressure and all of that stuff. And my wife was great through the show running process. And then my real partners are Liz Glotzer and Michelle King at King Size Production. Michelle and her husband Robert are the co-creators of The Good Fight, The Good Wife, Evil, a lot of shows, and Liz Glotzer is their president and worked at Castle Rock for a long time. So that's where I met her. But those are the people that read everything I write before anybody else sees it. They see everything that comes out of the writer's room before any executive sees it or any actor sees it. And so you have to find people that you can rely on like that and trust. And so I was blessed by being positioned with great partners. And then, yeah, it's really almost all of it's about time and money. And as Liz says, you can't throw more time at a problem. So you fixate on how little time there is in the day and how much you need to do. And if you can delegate, you delegate. And also you have to learn that you're just not going to do everything you want. So prioritizing and then moving quickly. But it is, when you're doing a season of television, especially if you're writing and shooting at the same time, every minute of the day is accounted for.
Every minute, every single minute. There's that old three-pronged adage that you can have it good, fast, or cheap,
Yeah.
but you can't have all three. You can have
Yeah.
two of those three at any time. And in a show like you're talking about, or you know, primetime TV or Showtime series or whatever, you know you're going to have money, at least to more than your average bear, and you know you're going to have time to a certain extent, so you're not going to have it be cheap. It's going to be good and not cheap, good and expensive.
Yeah, it was yes. It was on Showtime, so yes, we had the tools, but the time, you just never have as much time as you want. When I became showrunner in sort of a circuitous way, and basically about 6 months after the season had started, and we didn't have any scripts, and they didn't move the start date. So
Oh, wow.
I think I started on April 1st or April 2nd, and we started shooting on June 16th.
Wow.
Yeah, so we had about 10 weeks to go and no scripts, and we were block shooting, so we were shooting two at a time. So we needed not one but two to be ready really, really quickly. And then 2 more after that and 2 more after that. And so it was a long and yet frighteningly short year.
You were also on season 1, but not as a showrunner, right?
Right. Correct.
And am I correct that when you were shooting that, we were still in the pandemic or coming out of the pandemic?
So season 1, yeah, so it was a totally different situation. I think that writer's room was in 2018, but we wrote almost all 10 episodes before, probably 6 or 7 before Bryan was cast, because we had a green light for the show. And then we had, I think, all 10 scripts before shooting started. And then at about episode 6, the pandemic hit. So there was a shutdown for several months. So season 1 took probably like 2 or 2.5 years to get made because of all of that.
Really?
Yeah.
I know that when I actually interviewed Bryan for this show, he was about to go back down to New Orleans as things were starting up again.
Yeah.
So you've been shut down for a while. Yeah.
Yeah. You can't tell when you watch season 1. You can't really tell where, other than the fact that actually there is a moment where jurors are wearing masks. But aside from that, like, it's pretty seamless. But yeah, there was a wide gap between, I think, episodes 6 and 7.
Well, I have been having such a fun conversation with Joey Hartstone for around an hour at this point. We're going to wind the show down a little bit. You've clearly had plenty of wonderful experiences in the business. And I'm wondering, in all of your experiences, can you share with us a story that's either weird, quirky, offbeat, strange, or just plain funny?
I have worked with 2 Lyndon Johnsons. One was Woody Harrelson. One was Bryan Cranston. So the script that I wrote, LBJ, that was the first thing I wrote that got produced. So it started to get some attention. Rob Reiner signed on to direct. We had a financier. We had producers. Everyone was ready to go. And Rob had been talking to Woody for quite some time. And so we were all waiting on Woody Harrelson to either say yes or to pass. And this went on for a very, very long time, several months. But in the process of writing the script, we started to get word, there's a play that's coming out. And then it was, there's a play with Bryan Cranston. And then as we're submitting drafts, there's a play with Bryan Cranston on Broadway. There's one that everybody loves. Now Spielberg is going to option it. Now it's going to be a movie. And so every step of the way, I'm looking at this script, LBJ, as if my whole career rests on the outcome of this, whether or not it becomes a movie. And Bryan Cranston is lurking in the shadows, making what becomes a Tony-winning play, and then ultimately all the way with HBO. So it's also on screen. And we're just thinking, he's killing us. Bryan Cranston is out there absolutely killing us. This is my dream. And it's going to be ruined by Walter White. and then what actually happened was Woody and Bryan connected somehow, and they talked on the phone. And Woody was saying, you don't want to be the second person to do this. And I also don't want to be compared to you. You've already played Lyndon Johnson now on Broadway at this point, done very, very well. You've gotten rave reviews. And Bryan actually said, this is a really big character. There's room for a lot of different interpretations, and you'll love playing him. And he not only gave him the green light, but he encouraged him to do it. And this was unbeknownst to me for several years, but it turned out the guy who I thought was going to kill my career actually saved it and encouraged the star of the movie to make the movie. And then I had the pleasure of working with him several years later.
Wow, how about that? That's some form of kismet. That doesn't happen every day.
Yeah.
That's true synchronicity and luck, all
Yes.
sort of conspiring at the same time. That's a great story. All right, so last question for you today, Joey. You've already shared with us a huge amount of really great information and much advice. And I'm wondering, do you have a solid piece of advice or a tip that you like to give to people who are starting out, or maybe they're in the business and trying to get to that next level?
For people who are trying to break in, especially as screenwriters, I hope this is a foolproof piece of advice, is the more good writing you do, the more chances you're going to give yourself to get lucky and be successful. And I say that because some people try to write a lot, but they only write first drafts. And some people try to polish that masterpiece for 10 or 15 years. And I think both ways can kind of lead you astray. And so I think I try to look at every piece of writing as a lottery ticket or a chance to get recognized or noticed or get lucky. And so the more of those you give yourself, the better. They have to be good, but don't, hopefully great, but they don't have to be the most precious thing in the world, because you're going to write something next. So keep writing and keep producing material.
Well, I think that's really spectacular advice, especially because maybe a little bit different with novels, but for sure in TV, you can't be precious with it. You've got to bang it out. You got to make it as good as you can get it, and then, hope that the gods are in your favor on it. And that's really as best as you can do, because you're not going to spend months and months and months dwelling on one episode of a show. It's just going to go, like we talked about earlier. I think that's really terrific advice. Joey Hartstone, this has been just so much fun for me to chat with you and to see you today, and I can't thank you enough for being a guest on the show today, and hopefully we get a chance to see one another in person one of these days again.
I would love it. Thank you so much for having me. It's been great to see you.
And so we've come to the end of today's Story Beat. If you like this episode, won't you please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great Story Beat episodes to you. Story Beat is available on all major podcast apps and platforms, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and many others. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.